Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre, and today on the show, Wayne Santos with his debut novel, The Chimera Code, or the Chimera Code, or the Chimera Code, and we'll ask him how to pronounce it. It is.
Um,
Oh,
I
Wayne
would.
is already jumping in here.
I'm just going
Camera,
to
go
jump
to
in and
Wayne.
say
Yes,
I'm
please.
going to go with the most common pronunciation is the Chimera Code. Although,
Chimera. Okay.
although personally I pronounce it the Chimera Code, but that's me, and I understand a lot of people don't agree with that, but that's the way it is in my head. So yeah.
Okay, we'll stay in your head. Chimera Code. Chimera Code sounds good, and we will discuss my ability to not pronounce things uh, that 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 I have pronounced in my head before the show. Chimera Code is Wayne's debut novel, and we'll talk to Wayne in just a minute. But I would like the camera to zoom back a little bit and show where we're actually situated, because this set was built by our marvelous set designer Ruby, who I related the story to her. She also got a NetGalley book that she read, and she was trying to build a set that kind of um, is in line with the themes of the book. And we'll get deep into the book because the book is a full on action cyberpunk novel, hence our setting. But besides the required low life high tech stuff, there's also magic in it, and it really works. The hero Cloak works with a diseased colleague who's uploaded into the matrix, of course. So you got constructs or emulations for that matter. There are cyborgs, man machine interfaces, but Cloak can also make buildings float because she has mastered mass negation. She can light a cigarette with her finger. So you got this type of magic intertwined with everything that you wanted from a cyberpunk uh, novel. Hello, Wayne. How are you? Am I pronouncing your first name correctly?
Yes,
At
you are
least.
pronouncing it correctly. Yeah. It's like don't worry, you nailed that one. We're fine.
So
Totally fine.
your avatar is Lucid Page, and and I could not believe this. You came into Second Life in 2004.
Yeah, which is like what, 16 or 17 years ago now. So that,
Damn.
yeah, that's the before times now by like, the Second Life cosmic calendar. It's kind of scary.
This is really amazing because, for the book club, I approach authors who I find of interest, who get recommended to me, or I got a liking to what they have to offer. Also, we try to, go for variety. So I approached you, and then he's like, "Yeah, I have a Second Life avatar. Here he is," and it goes like, "Oh my God, I haven't. Second Life wasn't even on my radar remotely in 2004. So that's
Well,
that's awesome."
I don't even understand how you found me and like, sought me out for this, because I'm one of those people that, for better or for worse, was pandemic debut, which means that it's like, oh, people were distracted with other things while 2020 was going on. So to me, it's kind of a bit of a surprise that somehow I pinged your radar anyway, despite all that. But it's like, I'm
This is
glad I'm here.
This is serendipity, Wayne. I cannot explain it. Maybe we're all just uploaded into the matrix, and we just connect with each other on that plane. Who knows? Now, in preparation for this show, I read your book. I enjoyed it a lot, and then I reread Neuromancer. And for the kids at home or in the audience, I don't know how old people are and what relationship they have to the term cyberpunk as a literary genre or game or whatever. But for me, Neuromancer was, and I read it rather late, maybe in the like 92, 93 or something like that. I really don't remember. Maybe 91 before Snow Crash. But Neuromancer by William Gibson came out in 1984. And that to me was just incredibly, I mean, it was just a total game changer of absolutely everything. And obviously not for me. I mean, he uh, put AIs in there, the manipulative AIs. VR was hinted at, the Matrix. I think he coined that term, or he first used it in that context.
He was the creator of the phrase cyberspace. That was him.
Cyberspace, exactly. And
Yeah,
cyberspace was and I think later he said like he didn't even know like what, he was not really thinking deeply, just thought it sounded cool.
yeah.
But the constructs people uploaded into the machine, those types of concepts, it's just such a completely mind-boggling novel. And also, and I completely forgot until I reread it, was also with Rastafarians and that kind of a parallel plot, how they sort of navigate the future and how they sort of keep the faith, all this drug use. Long story short, we're not going to talk here about William Gibson, Wayne. Don't worry. The reason why I'm setting it up is, um, I'm wondering first, how was your entry into cyberpunk as a genre, and where did you get the confidence to write this book in this genre when there is just so much stuff out there?
Okay, well, as far as what my entry point into cyberpunk was, you've pretty much nailed it. I wouldn't say that you actually read Neuromancer too late. I mean, it's like, you read it in the 90s, so it would still been out like less than 10 years at that point. I'm pretty sure that I encountered Neuromancer just a few years after it had debuted, although my first introduction to William Gibson was his collection of short stories, Burning
Hmm.
Chrome.
Hmm.
Um, and that blew me away because there were actually three short stories in there that were all part of the same Neuromancer world. Like, one of them even introduced Molly for the first time. So,
Hmm.
so yeah, I read that book and I was like, oh my God, I had no idea that science fiction could be like this. Like with you, for me, it was a total game changer. I mean, up until that point, I'd been dutifully reading the classics, like, I'd been doing my Arthur C. Clarke, and I'd been reading my Isaac Asimov, and I'd been deeping into Robert Heinlein. And then along comes, at this time, this, upstart young punk, William Gibson, who just suddenly takes the lyricism of like literary writing and
Yeah.
somehow kind of just jams that into a science fiction setting. But then at the same time, he takes what at the time were contemporary 80s concerns, like, rampant, corporate rule and, where the human technology interface was going to take us. And he added like this street vibe to it, but then, pasted all of that with like, some of the most lyrical, poetic writing that I'd ever seen. And I was like, it just was amazing to me that this was still technically considered science fiction because it wasn't like Asimov or Clarke or Heinlein or anything like that. So I absolutely fell in love with William Gibson at that point and just like devoured everything that he wrote. And combined with him, Stephen King and Neil Gaiman, that basically
Hmm.
comprises my holy trinity of like, three people that made me want to be a writer. But yeah, Gibson was it. I was just like, I have to try and do this myself after reading him doing it in Neuromancer.
This is so interesting because when we first met, I thought like, oh, maybe because you also have a lot of influence from games and anime. This is something that was not so much on my radar. I always say like, I didn't play games because I was so obsessed with becoming a musician. So when my friends played games, I was just practicing the stupid uh, harmonic minor scale all day long. So I was not sure if your influence was actually also coming from William Gibson, or it was other things. But I suppose then later you added, because that comes through in your book as well. I mean, all these other influences, um, you added those. Do this leads me to restate my follow-up question. Now, when you look at the plethora of offerings in that cyberpunk um, genre in all these different media, that the door that William Gibson um, opened. I was just I'm always impressed when people say, "Hey, I have something to say in this genre, and I'm gonna do it." And you did it, and you did it really well.
Oh, thank you. Um, okay, so there are basically two motivations for why I finally decided to commit to the Chimera Code. Um, the first motivation actually comes from some of the tabletop role-playing gamer nerds will probably remember this reference.
Ah.
Shadowrun if any of you guys are actually familiar with that. Shadowrun was a cyberpunk tabletop role-playing game, but it had one major twist that they'd added onto it was that they mashed up the typical William Gibsonian cyberpunk setting, but then they threw in dragons and dwarves and orcs and goblins and magic and all of that other stuff. So basically, high fantasy Tolkien-esque elements were it's like uneasily coexisting with William Gibsonian cyberpunk setting. And I played that game and I enjoyed it, but the one thing that I had always wondered about with that game was what would happen if you just kind of stripped away all the other fantastical elements, take away the elves and the dwarves and the dragons and the goblins and the orcs and all that stuff, and you were just left with just the one thing, the magic. And if you had magic, how would that actually interface with a cyberpunk world, let alone a real world like ours? Like, how would you economize magic? How would you profit from it? Because if you've got magic in the world, sooner or later, somebody's going to try and figure out how to make money off of it, or at the very least, try and control it. And I was kind of curious as to how that was going to happen. So for quite a few years, I kind of threw around the idea of a magical cyberpunk world in my head, but I didn't necessarily have the confidence to write it. So I kept trying to write a bunch of other books and get those published, but none of them took. So it was quite a few years of writing things like urban fantasies and it's like even horror type novels, which never really sold. And then basically 5 or 6 years ago, I was kind of at the end of my rope and thinking, okay, this trying to become a published novelist thing isn't really working out for me. So maybe it's time to just it's like put that hobby away and just concentrate on my typical conventional freelance writing gigs. So I thought, well, if I'm going to go out, then I'm going to go out with a bang, and I'm finally going to write that book that I never had the confidence to write. May as well make my last book the one book that I really wanted to write.
Right.
So I just thought, okay, it's time to drag Cloak and all the rest of them out, and just it's like see what happens when I put that out there. And much to my delight and chagrin, it's like, the one book that I'd always wanted to write was the one that finally got published after years of trying to chase the market and write to trend. Yeah. The book that did get published was really the one that, I probably should have been doing right from
So the audience, did you absorb this lesson? Stick with whatever feels good to you.
Do what you love, kids.
Yeah, do what you love, even if it's completely off trend or if it violates the unwritten rule. I don't know. I'm not an author, but I could imagine that there is an unwritten rule: never mix magic with especially hard sci-fi, because the hard sci-fi fans, they're gonna impale you. They're gonna kill you by saying like, this does not work in that universe that you created.
Yeah, see that
you can't just mix that stuff, man.
Yeah, see that is my own particular hobby horse, and this is something that I bring to a lot of my other stories in many, many different ways. But I've noticed I have this one fundamental writer's tick where I like to take what seem to be two different systems, whether that's cyberpunk and magic, or Greek folklore and Asian folklore, and I like to see what happens when those two systems collide with each other and have to interact in unexpected ways. Mm-hmm. I always like going into those interactions and seeing what kind of exploits and loopholes and unexpected consequences and side effects arise of two competing, seemingly isolated systems now being forced to confront each other. That's always been a thing with me.
And like I said, I mean, you really accomplished something that I didn't even think about if that was possible or not. But then when I started reading, it's like, oh, is that possible? Yes, it is. If you're just tuning in, this is the Second Life Book Club. Our guest today is Wayne Santos with his debut novel, The Chimera Code. And a chimera is, I'm going to throw up a little slide that was created by our co-producer, Shyla, which is here a little statue of a chimera with a snake tail, a lion's head, and out of the side comes a goat or something. What is this? A goat comes out of the side.
Yeah. It's a mythological creature that's comprised of many different animal heads, and the reason that I picked that was because that is the name of the particular type of combat unit that Cloak is in. She runs with what are called Chimera units, which is a really unstable, but if it actually works, highly effective combination of conventional combat cyborg combined with hackers for digital warfare combined with combat mages for mystical warfare.
Oh
So
man.
that
That
definitely is three creatures of many different heads. But like I said, it's an unstable combination, but if you can actually get all three of those units to work, it can be devastating. And Cloak is in one of the premier combat units in the Chimera Code world. So,
and you can even bring down multinational corporations or AIs that I don't want to spoil anything, but sometimes AIs can be split. They can be split personalities. They may want to do different things with their lives, and they're in conflict with each other, and so on and so forth. So we're gonna get a reading from you now, Wayne, and I'm
okay.
gonna bring up the magic through the magic of Second Life. I'm gonna bring up the little book stand. If I could ask you to stand up and walk towards the front of the stage here with this little book display. I just brought up the book display. And actually, before we read, there's a good question from Shyla coming here. How would your younger self view your literary work uh, right now? This is a question that always comes up, along the lines of when do you know, is it time? Am I good enough to publish now? But how would you say your younger self would look at what your output is right now?
I think that in this case, my younger self would probably be simultaneously pleased and disappointed.
How?
Pleased,
Yeah.
yeah, pleased in the sense it's like, oh wow, you did it. It's like you wrote the things that you wanted to write, but disappointed in the sense of like, oh, that actually took a lot longer than we were expecting. Since it's like because when you're young and arrogant, it's like your dream is like, oh well, it's like I'm going to be like a New York Times best-selling publisher by the time, author by the time I'm 23,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that totally did not happen in my case. So
This is really well put. I mean, I bump into a friend from music college all the time, and he's a touring musician. He's quite successful. He's a jazz guy. He plays a lot of instruments, and he plays in big bands, and he's really well known. He plays in studios, and every time I meet him, he goes like, ah. I said, "How are you doing?" He goes like, "Yeah, I still haven't written that hit song."
yeah,
And I go, "What are you talking about, man? You fulfill your dream here." Anyways, yeah, but he cannot let go of this dream. So let's read something, Wayne. And oh, I forgot to introduce a guest here that we have on the side, and we've been talking about him. William Gibson is typing away here on the side of the stage in front of the cover of Neuromancer. Hello, William. Maybe if you get friend requests, don't feel compelled to reciprocate if you don't want to. But William is typing away here and keeping us company. And now back to the Chimera Code. So we're
okay,
hearing a story where Cloak, the hero, goes to Japan, and she and her cohorts were contacted. And I don't want to spoil too much, but by some strange folks, they hacked into their communication, and this, I don't know, could possibly be an AI or an emulation. So you go ahead, set it up, Wayne.
okay. So Cloak, by this point, has decided that she wants to take more aggressive action in, digging through the mystery of uh, somebody hiring her for a very particular job. So she decides to go to a old friend and contact that she has in Japan to try and pick up a tool slash weapon slash accessory that she thinks is going to be useful in the upcoming case. So here we go with Cloak in Japan. The next day, Cloak was in Japan and, as always, the country provoked mixed feelings. It had been one of the countries she'd most wanted to visit when she was young, the land of the ninja and samurai, the birthplace of anime, and an example to the rest of the world about how losing a war didn't have to mean the decline of a nation. She'd had big expectations when she'd first come here. Some had been met, others torn down, and then there were things she hadn't been expecting at all, like Hero. Cloak stopped walking in the middle of the forest path and looked around. Everything was the way it was supposed to be: quiet, primeval, and seemingly free of modern surveillance. Which, of course, was utter bullshit, because Hero was here, and she knew how much he liked his toys, how he liked to mix and match them. There was energy here, thaumaturgical. Not enough for a full-blown spell, but more than enough for it to be simple, ambient background fields waiting for a touch like hers to manipulate them. It was small but constant, not a pulse or wild fluctuation, so it was probably some kind of object. The feel of the energy was unmistakable. Mass negation. Something in the area was lighter than it was supposed to be. She scanned the brush carefully, but could see nothing. So she concentrated, reaching out towards the natural energy in the area and shaping it, twisting it, spreading it out, turning it into a strong wind that blew through the trees. And that's when she saw it. The branches and leaves of one particular tree rustling unnaturally against an optic camouflage system that couldn't keep up with the unexpected disturbance in the environment. The break in the visual pattern was human-shaped, crouching in the branches of one of the taller trees. Cloak raised both her hands. I can see you, and I will submit to a scan. You probably already know I'm unarmed. The unit shut off the camouflage, revealing itself for what it was: a heavily modified love doll, originally built to resemble a delicate Japanese girl dressed as a French maid. It was another typically Baroque example of Hero's collection. It had been retrofitted with some combat chassis parts, and the fishnet stockings had graduated to full-on fishnet body stockings in keeping with a kunoichi, a female variant of a ninja. The French maid's hat and frilly skirt remained, however, as it perched in the tree like some surreal adolescent fantasy, which was consistent with Hero's degenerate style. The ninja doll dropped to the ground and stood in front of Cloak, saying in English, "Security scan confirms no weapons. ID scan incomplete." "I'm not in standard databases," Cloak said. "Transmit my image to your central security, you'll get your authorization." The security doll said nothing, but Cloak assumed it was going through the usual channels. 30 seconds later, it said, "Authorization granted. Proceed down the path. Do not deviate." It resumed its camouflage, blurring into a transparent, hypersexualized, curvy silhouette, slightly distorting the bark and foliage behind it. It leapt back into the trees to resume its mechanized vigil. Cloak continued onwards. She always had to make the trek to talk to him. It was the physical thing, as he called it. There wasn't any other way to contact him because he was so analog, staying off the net, refusing all online devices, living off the beaten path in some big old house shuttered away in the mountain forests east of Kyoku, a small town on the island of Shikoku. It was one of the least populated, least popular islands in Japan, which was probably why Hiro chose to live here. It was also a pain in the ass for the Japanese government that considered him a national treasure, but they weren't going to do anything that would somehow cloud his frame of mind and impede his work. Fortunately for Cloak, with her standing with both the GIS and the college, it gave her enough rank to pull that she could get through the nearly invisible layers of security to tromp through the path in the woods that led to Hero's complex. Although complex might have been too strong a word for a decent-sized home, the cottages for all his help, completely self-sufficient and off the grid, and the smaller buildings where he worked with his apprentices. Okay, I think we'll leave it there. That's about like 4 minutes. So
Awesome, Wayne. This is Wayne Santos reading from the Chimera Code, and actually, we have Cloak. If the camera can look in the first row here, we have Cloak here in the first row with a fireball in her hand. Wonderful reading, Wayne. And this part goes on where Cloak picks up this sword, and like I said earlier, I mean the combination of magic and this high tech future really works, and the sword plays an incredible role as well. You're right. There's a long, yeah. You can sit back down. I'm sorry. Yes, of
okay,
course.
I will sit back down.
It's getting very tiring here in Second Life. Um, the the fight scene at the very end, it fascinates me because you did a fantastic job, and this in this long fight sequence with Cloak and the sword, and there is cyborgs, and mercenary cyborgs are fighting, and other weird tentacle type beings. Um, how Where can you learn how to write a fight scene that is it's not easy to do in a visual medium, but it's a visual thing, and it's just very impressive that you can sort of write this kinetic, powerful sequence, and you can really visualize it. So this must is a challenge.
It's I see. This is where I have to give a really unsatisfying answer because I cannot give a reasoned, logical, linear explanation for the way I do it. I mean,
Hmm.
my particular writing style is primarily I have a movie or an anime or whatever you want to call it just playing out in my head. So
Hmm.
I feel like I'm watching this already with like, a long shot camera, just kind of like, depicting all of the action. So really all I'm doing is transcribing the movie that I'm seeing in my head and just using words to pick the particular camera angles that I want to emphasize from the movie that I'm seeing that's playing internally. But
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you what that
No, I mean that.
process was for how I actually determined what
Well,
words I use to lay out the action.
I acknowledge, just like asking BB King is like, how do you play the blues? But but no, I mean this is a great answer. But you still, I mean, it's still hard. It's still it's a bigger challenge than writing a screenplay. I mean, you make it sound like you're writing a screenplay, but you also have to write it in satisfying, prose
Yeah.
basically. Yeah. Uh, I want to the camera. If the camera could zoom up behind us, is a mural of a character by the name of Miria who appears in your book. And the mural here behind us may say "I love Miria." It's a GIF actually, so it changes a little bit. And Miria is a very interesting character. She's a huge star in a kind of should I say Second Life type virtual reality
You
realm.
can say that since Second Life clearly did actually inform some of my ideas of neurosimulation in the future. I can honestly say that Second Life did have an impact in that regard.
There you go. Uh, she's fascinating because this is what I think as a Second Life enthusiast. This is what I deal with a lot because people will ask me about addiction and they will ask me about escapism, and you leave this very open. There's really good dialogue with this huge megastar Miria, and her real life counterpart, which who did not have an easy life, and who is also physically. Um, there are some challenges with her that she has physically, and in the virtual world, she really thrives. She has a huge positive influence on millions of people, and the dialogue that you have in there really talks a little bit about escapism, and also the addiction angle is sort of underneath, or maybe I interpreted into it. But what would
No,
you
you
say to
you you got it correctly. Yes, there definitely is an addiction angle to it for sure.
I found this really beautifully written because you don't judge, and it's so easy. I mean, we're all in these conversations where people just say like, these are all, losers that are addicted to something and whatnot. How would you respond to someone saying that if this conversation comes up about virtual worlds or games even or whatever, that this is all just escapism and has absolutely no bearing on reality, and you should get a grip on reality.
I would say that escapism itself actually does have value, and like anything else, it's like if you become addicted to anything, whether it's alcohol or gambling or sex or video games or it's like virtual environments, then that can be bad for you. But like anything else, if it is something that you enjoy and brings value to you and takes you away, at least for a little while, from the things in your world and life that are bringing you down, then that's important. And you should keep doing that. You just
Mhm.
should not keep doing it too much because too much of anything will hurt you.
Oh, but this can be difficult. I mean, it can
It
you
can.
you.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not gonna. This is a tough issue. I mean, my answer is always that an addiction is a serious issue that can have different outlets, like you were saying, and we have to really offer solutions to the underlying problem. At the same time, I have seen plenty of people in Second Life who used the Second Life community in which they were active as an energy booster that gave him the confidence to go back out in the physical world, and do all sorts of amazing things. So that is also something I think that's a little bit underreported, if you will, right?
Yeah, I mean that is the thing with online environments, whether it's an MMO game like Final
Yeah.
Fantasy 14, or just a purely online environment like Second Life where you can do whatever. The thing is that what I what you want to call mainstream community, I guess, what not everybody realizes is that digital environments for other people can level the playing field. So if you were somebody that was you know deaf in the real world, or you were using a wheelchair, or you suffer from some neurological disease like Parkinson's or something like that, none of that is necessarily going to be an issue when you go online. And
Hmm.
you know I think that that's great, and that's one of those aspects that so many people that are able-bodied and don't experience any kind of major limitations in life, they forget that for other people coming into virtual environments, this is the one place where they can finally interact with others without those limitations. It's like getting in the way. So why would you take that away from somebody? It's like I don't understand. So that's why I tend to take a dim view of people that think that digital environments are nothing but pure escapism. It's like, okay, it's pure escapism for you, but for other people, this levels the playing field. And that's a really, really important thing. I'm not going to take that away from anybody. And I think that we should emphasize more people who feel like they're not on a level playing field in real life. Well, maybe you can find it online. And if you do find it online, who knows what that's going to do for you as a person? Who knows how that's going to improve you and make you grow? So,
Hmm.
it's like, give it a try. It's like, see what happens.
An augmentation. It
Yeah.
can be very much an augmentation. And I'm glad you mentioned Final Fantasy. I have a slide, but before we go there to the also the origins of Cyberpunk, defining it. What I really like in your book, the acknowledgments. I want to read this here real quick. You write the first thank you goes to Mrs. Pinces and Miss Palazzo and the English teachers at Archbishop O'Leary for encouraging me to consider the possibility that words could do more than just be weaponized for snark. Thanks also goes to Candace Jane Dorsey as a writer in residence at the Edmonton Public Library. She steered me in the right direction towards a group that would be critical to my development. The second thank you goes to that group, the still up and running Cult of Pain Writers Group, for putting up with a kid that wanted to write and believing he could do it. If you could comment on the importance of, and I think we all have that, of people who gently push us into the right direction. And it's almost always one or two teachers early on, middle school, high school, maybe. But you also mentioned here the public library. I find these entities, if you will, incredibly important, and we're in danger of losing them too. So talk a little bit about the importance. I mean, this is the first acknowledgement that you have here in your book, and then you go on for 5 more pages, which is fine.
Yeah. Yeah, there were a lot of people to acknowledge because, yeah, that was a lot of years of trying to write. But yeah, anyway, um, I mean, that's the thing, right? It's like on the one hand, when you're growing up as a surly teenager, as a result of the media you consume, or at least the media that I consume, you tell yourself that you're supposed to have an innate distrust of like the adults and the grown-ups because they're over 30 and therefore have
Yeah.
no clue of what's happening and they can't be trusted. And, hey, I watch Logan's Run, I know what happens. Um, but then at some point, you do meet adults who you feel you can trust because it's like they do take you seriously, or they do see something in you that maybe your so-called peers are not actually seeing. And for me it was my English teachers because I was when I was a kid, I'd already decided that I wanted to do something creative in the future, and I'd kind of narrowed my path down to um, art, like visual illustration, or maybe something musically inclined like playing the piano, or maybe writing. But when it came to the visual arts and music, I kept thinking to myself that there was probably a ceiling that I was going to hit very quickly, where I was not actually going to be able to get past that. But when it came to the writing, that was where I could see the writing continuing to improve. And that was where I actually
Mhm,
had access to teachers that
mhm,
would say things like, okay, I see that you're actually trying to do something with your writing. Let me give you a little bit of advice as to how to achieve this effect that you're going for. And I would be like, oh my God, these teachers are actually teaching me something that I can find useful in my daily life. It's like, what manner of sorcery is this? So,
mhm.
um, they were the first ones who said, it's like, hey, look, we noticed that you're actually pretty good at this writing thing. It's like you want to consider it. So I did actually devote myself to spending more energy in writing. And then one day, um, I think it was. I'm not even sure how I found out about this, but I'd heard that the Edmonton Public Library had a writer in residence that was like helping people out that wanted to improve their writing. But Candace Jane Dorsey was a local Edmonton science fiction writer, and previous to that, it was writers in residence who wanted to help writers with typically Canadian ambitions of writing literary Canadian fiction, like the Margaret Atwoody type of people living quietly desperate lives in academic communities, or out
Mhm.
on the midwestern plains, and like staring at wheat waving in the wind and equating that with the existential angst of their life. So I was like, okay, there's no way that I want to do any of that. But Candace Jane Dorsey was actually interested in science fiction and fantasy, so I figured I got nothing to lose. I sent her a writing sample, and she actually asked me to come down to the library, and she, we sat down and we had a long talk about the kind of writing I wanted to do. And she clued me into the fact that other people throughout the city were trying to do that as well, and that she actually managed a small writers group of fantasy and science fiction people. And would I, as a high school student, be actually interested in attending this? So I did, and that was a huge level up for me, actually hanging out with other people that were writing science fiction and fantasy, some of whom had already been published. So um, I probably
Ah,
accelerated a lot in my growth as a writer as a result of that one meeting with Candace Jane Dorsey, and her actually saying, okay, this is an insolent, it's like Asian Canadian punk, but it's like he seems pretty serious about this science fiction thing. So what the hell? Let's invite him into our group. And
this is totally fascinating, and Wayne, I even forgive you the little snide remark against literary fiction, because as people know, I actually love to absorb thick door stoppers that talk for 500-600 pages about the inner monologue of somebody staring out at the sea.
yeah,
But let's not judge. Shila's asking the questions I was going to ask, because this group was called this writers group was Cult of Pain. What
yeah.
does that mean?
They eventually called themselves the Cult of Pain because the one thing that you could count on them when you submitted your work to them was you would get not mean-spirited, but you would get brutally honest assessments of your writing. And
Hmm.
not everybody was necessarily prepared to hear the truth about their writing if it needed a lot of work.
Hmm.
So, as a result of like, some people getting their egos and it's like sense of self-worth like eviscerated by some of these writing critiques, they eventually did decide to call themselves the Cult of Pain. Although when they went online, that was hilarious because there were some people that took Cult of Pain to mean something else entirely, and they eventually had to like turn away a lot of applicants going like, no, we are not an Edmonton S&M club, we're not
You
doing that
just,
sort of thing. It's like it's wrong application, dude. There is a club for that, but that's not here. Go elsewhere. So
oh my God. And what did you do? You set them into Second Life? All right.
yeah, perhaps some of them are actually floating around here. Like Candace Jane Dorsey sent me, dude. So
Um, so if you're just tuning in on YouTube, and we're on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. If you're just tuning in, our guest today is Wayne Santos, and his debut novel is the Chimera Code. And I also did not mention earlier, because people are wondering why behind us is like a little glimpse. You look through this sort of wall paneling, and there is Some people have identified this as Washington Street in Hoboken, New Jersey, with the old German bakery right there. And the reason this is again the intricate set design of Ruby, who is in the audience today. You can tip her by tipping the tip jar. The reason here why we put the set together like this is the Cloak, the star of your book, has recreated her fairly modest upbringing, or I guess in the down dilapidated apartment in New Jersey, and she recreated that in virtual reality. It was a little
She
unclear to me.
she actually recreated a real world
She re
reconstruction of her shitty
Right,
Jersey apartment in her palatial home.
in her palatial home, but
Yep,
when you looked out the window, you actually saw sort of the streets there. There was a, I guess, a simulation outside.
of Hoboken, yeah, through the window,
Ah,
yes.
okay.
So
Or maybe just like a matte painting, like Star Trek,
exactly,
original
yeah, but
Star Trek.
but 3D so that you could actually change the angle as you like looked around in the
A-
window.
And we can do that here in Second Life. I
Yeah,
love that. I love that so much because she gets hired and she does these jobs and she's doing well economically, and she reminds herself by building this replica. Quick question: there you mention artificial intelligence in your book, but you also then have the term virtual intelligence. Real quick, what is a virtual intelligence?
For me, the distinction is actually quite simple. A virtual intelligence is not actually sentient. It's just sophisticated enough with its algorithms and responses that it can interact with people normally, and they don't have too many issues with interface problems and it not understanding what they're saying or anything like that. Artificial intelligence, on the other hand, is actually true sentience, where it's thinking and feeling, and it's like coming to assessments about you and totally internally judging you, whereas a virtual intelligence doesn't do any of that. It just may as well be intelligent for the purposes that you need while you're interacting with it,
I
but not
see.
actually sentient.
This is what Silicon Valley always tries to sell us as the semantic web, but the web is nowhere near semantic right now, I would
Exactly,
say.
yeah. So
Ah, I threw up another slide that Shyla prepared here because we don't want to, we're also an educational program, Wayne. So here's the definition of cyberpunk. Uh, from Wikipedia, cyberpunk is a subgenre of science fiction in dystopian futuristic settings that tends to focus on a combination of low life and high tech, featuring advanced technological and scientific achievements such as artificial intelligence, cybernetics, juxtaposed with a degree of breakdown of radical change in the social order. I would add what we mentioned earlier with Neuromancer, specifically the drug angle. The main protagonists in Neuromancer, they have drug problems of various kinds. There is also sexual exploitation of Molly. You picked this up in your book as well, with a wonderful character by the name of Z. Also, what I learned in researching for the show is that actually Judge Dredd the comic started in 1977. Can you believe it? And it's also
yeah,
considered cyberpunk. And then there's a short story called Cyberpunk by Bruce Bethke. Came out in '83 in Amazing Stories, and then here's a little image of Final Fantasy, and of course Blade Runner 1982, Neuromancer 1984. So those were the days.
yeah. Those were the seminal cyberpunk works. Yeah, for sure.
But Judge Dredd really kind of surprised me. I mean, I never really thought about. I thought Judge Dredd was pretty cool, but then I wasn't like a super fan, so I'm not really super familiar with the whole
Yeah,
world.
yeah. Judge Dredd is definitely in. Judge Dredd is one of those things a bit like Starship Troopers, where some people will say, "Oh, that's brilliant satire," and some people will just not get it and think it's like,
Aha.
"Wow, that's very cool," and we need to be exactly like that. And like, kind of missed the
Well, but
point
that's
there.
and I don't know if this is a Cory Doctorow quote or if he keeps saying this often, that a lot of people think cyberpunk is sort of a manual, but no, it's not. It's a
Yeah,
warning.
it's
Yeah.
it's a cautionary tale. Yeah, you're not supposed to be like, "How can we duplicate this?" You're trying to avoid it.
That's what all the Silicon Valley tech
Yeah,
bros are like. Hey, we're still not there, but we're trying to
yeah,
replicate it.
exactly.
We have another story you have, and I actually don't know if that's already out. The Difficult Loves of Maria McKilling,
Macaling is how that's
Muckling,
pronounced. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Eh,
that is out. That actually came out in March. There's a little bit of a catch-22 with it, though, where currently the physical editions, the only ones that exist are signed, and you can only get them directly from the Rebellion um,
oh,
publishing website. However, the digital versions you can get from all your usual retailers. It's only the physical one that you may be in trouble with if you absolutely insist on having that one.
I have nothing against a awesome signed copy. Shyla put the link into the chat. And the difficulty of Maria Muckling is it's not in my hands, but I glean from the sleeve that she she works in the video game industry, but she's also a very, very old Filipino goddess. Is that
That's
right?
correct. Yep. Yes, she actually
Ah.
works as an environmental concept artist with a big Toronto video game developer called Everywhere that in no
Oh.
way has any resemblance to a big Toronto software development company called Ubisoft.
Uh-oh. Okay.
It's
Just
it's totally not
coincidental.
that. There's no resemblance whatsoever between the two.
And I mean, this is you wrote me that what we're gonna hear is she is trying to she has a sidekick, a horse, and they're trying to wire themselves through Western Union, disguised as money. They're
Yes.
trying to teleport to the Philippines. So this sounds incredibly enticing, and I'm super looking forward to reading it. This plays with different cultures. Um, Canadian culture and Filipino culture. What
Yeah.
gives?
That's correct. It's an urban fantasy comedy. Uh, this one has also got like a long roundabout origin story. But originally, one publisher was asking for novella length works that were more diverse and ethnic in nature. So I thought to myself, it's like, well, I'm Filipino, and people don't know a whole lot about Filipino folklore. So what if I do that? And at the same time, um, as some people had noted in the Chimera Code, they were like, you tend to like try to sneak in some comedy here and there. It's like,
Hmm.
have you ever considered writing actually a full-on comedy? So I thought, well, I might be too scared to do that for a full-length novel, but a novella sounds like a size that I can manage. Maybe being funny for 120,000 words is too much, but being funny for half that or less, I think I can manage that for a first try. So that's what ended up happening with this particular book. So in this case, the part that I'm going to be reading, Maria Makaling with her demon horse sidekick Teak are now wandering around through downtown Toronto to execute the plan that Teak has for getting them back to the Philippines. So here we go. When they finally stopped at Teak's urging, Maria found herself standing outside a building that, in retrospect, really should not have surprised her at all. It was a small Filipino grocery store. She was continually surprised by the fact that they managed to pay the rent in an area that was gentrifying as rapidly as the Bloor Bathurst area. But then maybe whoever owned the building had a big heart. They served all kinds of things here with familiar names. Mamacita's adobo mix, 555 sardines and tomato sauce, Saba squid in brine. And of course, they serve food too, like adobo, fried fish, freshly baked pandesal, pancit noodles, all the staples. So, why are we here? Maria asked. Teak pointed to a sign on the door. So they've got a Western Union outlet here. So we're going to wire ourselves over as money back home. Maria waited 5 seconds. 10 seconds. What? She finally asked. Fucking what? This is our shortcut, Teak said. If you wire money to the Philippines, there's going to be a person thinking about it here. There may be another person handling the transaction over there. That gives us a connection. I can hop us direct from one mine to another this way. Wiring money back home is a strong bond. You'll need to drop out and be visible again to do the deal, but this is our best shot. He looked down at Tate, then back at Maria. You want this guy safe or not? You go to home ground. This is how you do it fast. Take it or leave it. What's it going to be? Maria paced. She looked alternately at the counter where the wire transfer took place, deep in the bowels of the store, and at Tate, who was still in a hospital gown, but otherwise didn't look like he was in any immediate danger. She needed to keep him this way and safely out of harm's way. Fine, let's get this over with. I've never wired money to the Philippines before. How do I do this? I should not be surprised, and yet I am, Teak said. Man, for a Filipino, you're not very Filipino, are you? Just walk me through this, okay? Don't you have any relatives or something? Not any that I actually remember. Damn, you really did a number on yourself with this life, didn't you? Are we here to fight evil boyfriends or point out what a lousy Pinay I'm supposed to be? Okay, not judging. Totally not doing that. Just come up with a name and I'll see if I can help along. You ready? No. Perfect, let's go. Do you know how to become visible again? She nodded, although she wasn't entirely sure and she didn't know the body language for I'll get back to you on that. Maybe the Germans had something. They had a super specific word for everything. Still, she reached down into her available pool of memories, the divine ones that still shimmered and streaked through the plunging depths of her true identity like agile marine life. She saw what she was looking for and pulled the memory to her body, reliving it. She took a step and felt a faint tingling against her skin as if she'd walked through a curtain made of bubbles. She felt the same. She looked to where Teak stood, still holding Tate in his arms. You got this, Teak said. She probably didn't, but he'd made an effort to say something supportive, and she appreciated the gesture. She opened the door and walked in, holding it open as Teak ducked his head and lumbered through. The store smelled like childhood. The adobo was sitting in trays, kept warm. The smell of fried fish was everywhere, and it was clear that no one here cared enough about putting money into modern floor tiling or light fixtures. Someone could have waltzed in here with a pimp-feathered hat from the 1970s, complete with butterfly collars, and wouldn't have been out of place in this decor. Some Tagalog soap opera was being piped through a TV with screeching, tear-stricken women. The walls were filled with posters advertising condo spaces in Manila that were available for investment or for the family. Maria walked past the shelves of boxed canned goods, recognized 3 different brands of pork rinds, and finally stopped at a counter on the opposite end of the store, isolated and caged, like someone had cut a corner out of a slice of a pawn shop and dropped it in the corner. The guy at the counter looked younger than Maria. Well, technically, probably everybody was younger than Maria, but this guy looked like he might still be in college. He was alert, greeting her immediately as she stepped up and said, "Kumusta ka? How are you?" Okay, I think we'll leave it there.
Now, this is Wayne. Awesome. This is Wayne Santos reading here on the Second Life Book Club from the novella "The Difficult Loves of Maria Makilling," and just wonderful. I mean, I'm just I'm smelling a chicken adobo right now, and wiring yourself as a remission payment back to the home country. If people are not aware of this. This is a very American thing. I'm not sure if this is happening to this extent in European countries. I don't know, but that was when I moved to America. I was introduced to this practice, and it's just an incredible, awesome setup that you have here, Wayne. I mean, I'm looking forward to reading this.
Yeah, I
Somebody
mean,
mentioned in the notes that Gapno mentioned that he got an audiobook of it. Is there an audiobook out of this
there
already?
actually is an audiobook that is available.
Ah,
Yeah,
very
so,
cool.
yeah.
So please take a seat, and we are always running a little short on time, so we're going to skip the third reading. We're going to do this in the post game, very exclusive, just for the VIP club of your an upcoming story in an anthology. I want to mention the Not So Stories anthology, which is here on the table. If the camera could zoom in on the Not So Stories, and I think there's like, oh wow, there's a glowing maple tree on this cover, just like we have this little bonsai tree here on the table. So the Not So Stories is an anthology that is kind of an answer to a children's book classic from 1902 by Rudyard Kipling,
That's correct.
which it's completely ubiquitous. I was not familiar with it. Um, Putting a slide up here on the back, and this was called Just So Stories
That's right.
by
Yeah.
Rudyard Kipling. So what is the problem with the Just So Stories that you try to kind of counter?
Well, the Just So stories themselves were originally intended to be um, fairy tales or folklore that was
Hmm.
taken from South Asia and Southeast Asia and East Asia, but like dressed up for the safe consumption of European children.
Hmm.
So um, some of the stories, well, I mean, it's like all of the stories are suitable for child consumption, but at the same time, they tend to take a very colonialist, imperialist view, which means that, it's like when you read the story, there are all of these, it's like people of color that basically just exist to, like, prop up the white people and make them look good,
Hmm.
or, perhaps
Supporting
more problematically,
characters.
yeah, or
Yeah.
perhaps more problematically, they're actually the problem that needs to be solved by the white people. So that's kind of just like, yeah. So
Ah,
what
the
happened
good
was,
white man is just trying to help here. Come
yeah,
on.
exactly. It's like the great white god dispensing colonial wisdom upon the colored hoi polloi kind of thing. So what happened was Rebellion, my publisher of the Chimera Code, was actually putting together an anthology where they wanted people from that region, or diaspora from that region, to actually write their own takes on the Rudyard Kipling stories, and it's like how they feel about it now. And I was actually invited to be one of those people, writing the story. So since I'd spent about 12 or so years living in Singapore, I was very, very familiar with the the culture and the traditions that were there. So I figured, I'm just going to write a little horror story that involves what people do when they've got supernatural powers and they have
Mhm.
the opportunity to deal with colonialism. So that
It's
was
a
basically
fantastic
my
story.
contribution.
Yeah, no, spoiler alert, the white guy in the story, it does not end well for him, and it has to do with it's a Malay mythology of a dead woman that dies in childbirth, I guess, right? These
The
ghosts.
Pontianak, yeah, that's extremely prevalent in Malay and Singapore folklore. So
Wonderful story. Um, okay, we're bumping up against the clock. Let me see if people have questions here. Please put them in the local chat. We have Wayne until the bottom of the hour for the post game. Ah, Kahapua Sharpfang in the local chat says he, the white guy in the story, turns to shark food. I hope you haven't read the story, but that's a good guess. Um, yeah. Wayne, thank you so much for coming. It was an absolute treat having you here reading. Wayne's book, The Chimera Code, is out now. The Difficult Loves of Maria Makiling is out now. And in the post game, we will hear a little story from the Planes um, anthology that's coming out in October.
oh, I also
Uh,
have like one very small plug that I'd like to poke
oh,
in right now.
please, yes.
Okay, it's currently only available on Patreon, but on the 21st, a webcomic that I've written will be available for the public to consume. You can find it at nowherecomic.com, and it's basically what happens when a sociopathic homicidal elf loses his cat and
Of
tries to get it
course.
back.
Nowherecomics.com. Somebody please put that
Yeah.
into the local chat. Um, wow. Poor cats. I don't know, Wayne. What are we gonna do with you with the cats? Now you're against the cats. And the story, yet another roadside manifestation that we're gonna hear in the post game. Apparently, that has to do with a gigantic egg of some sort that is
Yes, it
blocking the
does.
roadway.
A
Okay,
real gigantic egg, I might add.
fantastic.
Yep.
The last question that we have now, always on the book club, is to ask the guest what is the guest reading, if anything, and very often, not always, but often, guests say that because they work with the written word all day long, for them to balance it out, it's actually good to just not read. But what are you reading right now, and would you recommend it?
I am actually finally checking off my bucket list, read all of the original Frank Herbert Dune books. So I'm finally
Oh.
on the last one. I'm reading Chapter House Dune right now.
Oh my
And
God.
yeah,
Is it true that he got progressively weird in the sexual realm? That's what I read about that.
the sexual element definitely does come to the fore in the later books. I mean, nothing pornographic or anything like that, but he definitely puts more of a concern on like sexual elements in those later books.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But he also like really pumps up the Bene Gesserit, which was kind of just like it's like, oh, okay, they were an interesting group in the first Dune book, and they're basically the stars of the show by the time you get to the last one.
Isn't there a Dune movie coming out? I vaguely
Yes,
remember.
there is. Oh my god, I'm so looking forward to that.
And isn't okay? Now I have to talk with my producer Strawberry, who's running the camera, because I remember that she sent me a message a while ago that his son, Frank Herbert's son, is involved with this movie somehow, and that we should invite him to the book club. So I have to start working on that.
Okay.
Oh my God. Okay, and then we'll have you actually, Wayne, as a guest host, and you're going to interview him because you're the expert. Now you read all the books.
I have read all the Frank Herbert books. I have not read all of the Brian Herbert books, although I've read quite a few of the Brian Herbert books. So
No. We have Brian Herbert talk about his father.
okay.
Sons are always in the shadows of their fathers. Let me tell you, I'm a father, and I intend my son to be in my shadow for the rest of time. Uh, that is, of course, tongue in cheek. Don't email me. Now, audience, also please put into the chat what are you reading. We'll collect that and we'll put that somewhere. We haven't figured out where to kind of disseminate and distribute this information. But please put it in the local chat. This was a wonderful show. I hope that Wayne is coming back now that he smelled the roses of Second Life a little bit again. What we also forgot to show, I don't know if we saw that on camera, the opening line of Neuromancer. Sorry, I'm going back and forth, but this amazing set will stick around, of course. Here, we're not going to dismantle this set. There is the opening line of Neuromancer hovering behind us, above, next to the Miria um, mural. Only Miria is the mural right now, and on the left side it says the sky above the port was the color of television tuned to a dead channel. So don't pick up Neuromancer if you haven't read it. Just get the Chimera Code and Neuromancer at the same time. People are putting their recommendations in the local chat. Thank you.
There's a lot of
Quick
good stuff in there.
quick credits. The Second Life Book Club every Wednesday, 12 o'clock. And that is 12 o'clock Second Life time, which is 8 o'clock GMT. We have it every Wednesday. Sometimes we have a little bit of a spin-off. The show is produced by Strawberry Linden, Shiloh the Super Gecko, and myself. Location manager, master builder, Ruby Geek. Please put your loose Linden shekels into the displayed tip jar right now. The avatars are made by Silas, Ruby, and Kralos. Special thanks, Marianne McCann, Theanine, Brett Linden, Patch Linden, AJ McDowell, Arden Schwartzman, and all the moles at Linden Lab. And let's see here. What else? Do we have any more credits? Oh yes, we have sponsorships. We got Bat Unicorn, Bespoke, Caravan, Blueberry, Creatures, Crescendo, Landscapes Unlimited, Linden Lab gave us some islands. They got to give us more islands. Nomad, Rag VR, Salt and Pepper, Slink, The Black Forest, Theanine. Oh, he's mentioned twice. And of course, What Next? If you have any recommendations, please email them to slbookclub@draxtor.com or ping our bot, Jared the bot. That's avatar name Jared Bot. Don't forget to tip the staff and spread the word to book lovers all around the grid. Next week is Lars Iyer. Lars Iyer wrote a hilarious book called Nietzsche and the Burbs, and he's also a philosophy professor. And he's talking about Nietzsche and Wittgenstein and whatnot. I have never heard these names before, and he's got to better explain himself, or he will never be invited again. And that's next Wednesday right here on the Second Life Book Club. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Wayne, and we'll see you in the post game.
Yep. Thank you.